She didn't fall in love the way they warned her about in all those books she read alone at 53. There was no thunder, no slow motion moment across a crowded room. There was only Elena's hand, steady, warm, deliberate, pressing a glass of wine into hers at a dinner party neither of them wanted to attend. And the way Elena looked at her afterward, not like she was beautiful, like she was readable, like she was a language Elena already knew but had been forbidden to speak her whole life. That was the beginning of everything Margaret thought she'd buried. That was the first word of a sentence that would take two bodies and the rest of their lives to finish. Margaret Calloway had spent 53 years being fluent in the wrong language. She had been fluent in, of course, in whatever you need, in I'm fine, don't worry about me. She had been fluent in the particular silence that fills a marriage after the children leave, and the house becomes an echo of everything that was never said. She had been fluent, God help her, in endurance. What she had never learned, what no one had ever taught her, what she had not even known existed as a vocabulary, was the language of her own wanting. The divorce had been civil. That was the word everyone used, and she had accepted it gratefully, the way you accept a diagnosis that finally explains a lifetime of symptoms. Civil. David had been civil. She had been civil. They had civilly dismantled 26 years over 4 months and 2 lawyers. And afterward, Margaret had moved into a small, bright apartment in Portland with hardwood floors and windows that faced east. And she had woken every morning to light that asked nothing of her, and she had thought, this is enough. This has to be enough. She had believed that for almost 2 years. Then came Diane's dinner party. Then came the linguine that nobody ate enough of. Then came the October rain against the tall windows and the smell of wood smoke and too much burgundy and 7 people she half knew talking about things she half cared about. And Elena Vasquez standing near the bookshelf with a glass of red wine and an expression of such precise, private amusement that Margaret had felt something shift inside her chest, like furniture being moved in a room she'd forgotten she had. Elena was 51. She taught comparative literature at Reed College. She had short silver hair and long hands and the unhurried quality of someone who had long ago decided that performance was beneath her. She wore a dark green dress that suggested she had dressed for herself and no one else. When Diane introduced them, Elena shook Margaret's hand and held it a half-second longer than convention required. "You're the architect," Elena said. Not a question. An act of reading. "I am," Margaret said, and felt, for reasons she could not have named, as though she had just confessed something. They talked for 2 hours, or Elena talked and Margaret listened and occasionally said something that surprised herself, something sharp, something true, something she hadn't rehearsed. At the end of the evening, Elena pressed a glass of wine into her hand and looked at her the way you look at a text. You are just beginning to understand its depth. Margaret drove home in the rain, with her heart doing something irregular and inconvenient. She didn't call it anything. Not yet. She didn't have the word. The word arrived 3 weeks later over coffee. They had met twice since Diane's party, once by accident at Powell's Books, once by what both of them would later admit was not entirely accident at the farmer's market on Shiloh Street. Each time the conversation had that quality of something unfinished, a sentence broken off mid-clause, a thought that required the other person present to complete itself. The coffee was Elena's suggestion, direct, without ceremony. "I'd like to continue our conversation. Are you free Saturday?" Margaret had stared at the text for 4 minutes before typing back, "Yes." They met at a small place on Division that Elena knew, dark wood and mismatched chairs and the smell of cardamom. Elena was already there when Margaret arrived, reading, of course reading, and she looked up with that unhurried expression, and something in Margaret's chest performed the same irregular movement it had been practicing since the dinner party. They talked about books first, which was easy, then about work, which was easier, then about their marriages. Elena's had ended 7 years ago, quietly, without malice, and that was harder and more necessary, the kind of conversation that takes up space and asks you to mean what you say. "Do you miss it?" Margaret asked. "Being married?" Elena considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. "I miss being known," she said finally. not the institution, the intimacy of being someone's primary text. Margaret felt the phrase land somewhere precise and undefended. Yes, she said. That. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, Portland did what Portland does in November, gray and relentless and somehow beautiful. Inside, something was being written between them in a language that had no alphabet yet, only feeling, only the particular electricity of two people recognizing in each other something they thought they had imagined. It was Elena who said it, gently, without drama, the way you state a truth that has been waiting patiently in the room. I want you to know that I find you extraordinary, Margaret, and I think you should know that I don't mean that casually. Margaret looked at her. Her coffee cup was warm between her hands. The cardamom smell was unbearably tender. I don't know how to do this, Margaret said, the most honest sentence she had spoken in years. Neither do I, said Elena. I think that's the beginning. The first time Elena kissed her, it was raining. Of course it was raining. This was Portland and this was November, and some cliches exist because they are accurate, because rain has always been the right weather for the things we do not plan, for the doors we open without knowing they are doors. They had been standing in the doorway of Margaret's apartment after their fourth meeting. Dinner this time. A small restaurant, long and slow and full of sentences that kept reaching towards something they hadn't named yet. Elena had her coat half on. They had been saying goodbye for 11 minutes, the way you say goodbye when you don't want to say goodbye, when the conversation keeps finding new rooms to wander into. Then Elena stopped mid-sentence and looked at her, and Margaret, who had spent 53 years being fluent in not yet, and maybe someday, and don't be foolish. Margaret looked back and said nothing and meant everything. Elena kissed her the way you read a poem you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting, slowly, carefully, with full attention. Margaret felt it everywhere, in her hands, in the space behind her sternum, in some deep, archived place that hadn't been opened in so long she'd assumed it had been sealed. She pulled back first. Not from fear, or not only from fear, but because she needed to see Elena's face, to verify that this was real and not some elaborate mercy her imagination had constructed. Elena's expression was open, steady, certain in the way that only the truly vulnerable can be certain. Tell me what you need, Elena said. And Margaret, who had never in her life known how to answer that question, who had spent decades rerouting the question before it could fully form, said, time, and you. In that order or simultaneously, I'm not sure yet. Elena smiled. It was the most beautiful thing Margaret had ever seen, and she was 53 years old and had seen considerable beauty. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said. That night, after Elena left, Margaret stood at her east-facing window and watched the rain and felt something she didn't immediately recognize. It took her several minutes to identify it correctly. It was possibility. Enormous, terrifying, ungoverned possibility. The feeling of standing at the beginning of a language you are only just learning to pronounce. She did not sleep much, but for the first time in years, sleeplessness felt like abundance rather than absence. They learned each other slowly. That was the gift of being older. Neither of them was in a hurry to perform. They had both spent enough of their lives performing. What they built instead was something quieter and more radical: presence. Elena came to Margaret's apartment on Tuesday evenings, and they cooked and disagreed about novels. And Margaret showed Elena her architectural drawings spread across the dining table, and Elena ran her fingers along the lines of buildings that didn't exist yet, as if she were reading Braille. Margaret went to Elena's lectures twice, sat in the back of the room, anonymous, and watched Elena command a room full of 20-year-olds with nothing but precision and passion, and felt something enormous and uncomplicated move through her. The physical was tender and unhurried, and occasionally they laughed, which neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. There is a particular grace in bodies that have given up performing youth, that know their own geography, that have made peace with gravity and history, and the strange, beautiful damage of living. They mapped each other with that grace, without apology, without the frantic urgency of the young, who love as if love might be revoked at any moment. "I didn't know it could feel like this," Margaret said one evening. January now, the apartment full of candlelight and the smell of whatever Elena had cooked, both of them on the couch with a blanket and a book they weren't reading. "Like what?" Elena asked. Margaret considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Safe," she said finally. "And also completely undone. Both at once. I didn't know those could coexist." Elena put down the book. "That's what it feels like," she said, "when someone sees your actual grammar." Margaret thought about that, about all the years she had been misread. All the years she had let herself be misread because it was easier than the work of being truly legible. All the years she had spoken in a language that fit poorly, like clothes bought for someone else's body. She thought about her east-facing window, about light that asked nothing of her, about how asking nothing and offering everything are not the same thing, about how she had confused the two for decades. She looked at Elena, silver-haired, unhurried, reading her with that precise and patient attention, and felt the full weight of what she had almost missed. The years she had almost not arrived at. The version of herself she had nearly left unconjugated. "I love you," she said. First time. No rehearsal. Elena looked at her for a long, full moment. Then, "I know," she said. "I've been waiting for you to find the word." Margaret Calloway learned at 53 that it is never too late to become fluent in yourself. That love at this age is not a second chance. It is a first chance arrived at through the necessary wreckage of everything that taught you what you didn't want. That two women in their 50s finding each other is not a consolation prize. It is the whole point. It is the sentence the universe was building all along, one hard-won word at a time. Now it's your turn. Have you ever found yourself, truly found yourself, later than you expected? Drop your story in the comments. You might be someone else's permission slip. And if this story moves something in you, share it. Someone in your life is waiting to read exactly this. The Verb. She releases soon. Follow for updates. Oh, for